Hello, my name is David Golub, and today we will look at a little more of an in-depth look at the DAX that makes up the ICD Critical Trend PowerPivot workbook. So, our goal in building the workbook is to create a dashboard that will show the top 10 trending international classification of disease for the past 10 days. It's really not intended to show the largest number of decedents, but just the day over day trending. This will allow us to look for any alarming trends, anything that we may need to take back action on. That could be a viral outbreak, really anything that pops out that we need to ensure gets addressed. So for today's session, we're going to need to get the decedent count. We will need to get a measure that takes the current day count and divides it by the prior day count. That's the number that we will use to do some filtering on to get the top 10. We'll have to understand in more of an intermediate fashion what's the last date within our data set where there was a decedent count. Because it's with that date that we will need to go back 10 days. And that's the date range that we will also use in our Excel filters to only show the past 10 days. And then we'll just do some Excel filtering. So let's first look at the very simple DAX function called count. And you can see here's our PowerPivot workbook, and we've typed in our measure count. And now we'll go create a pivot table, and we'll use this pivot table throughout our session. And we're just going to build this up so we can understand how these measures are evaluated. So let's take the count of decedent, and you can see there's 232,000 decedents for 2008. And we'll just do a little bit of adjusting so that we can always keep the column headers at the top. And so now let's drag the day-to-day along the row labels. So now we see the daily count from January 1st, 2008. And we can see the count all the way to December 29th, 2008. And we'll just continue to build this out. So next, now to calculate the count of decedents for the previous day. So you can see there's two DAX functions, calculate and previous day. And then we will take the, with the count decedent measure that we've already defined, we just defined that, divide that by the prior day count. And that should give us a number that will help us get the top 10 trending. Let's take a look. So here's the prior day count. That's what we've named the measure using the calculate and the previous day DAX functions. Go to msdn.com and search on these functions, and you'll see some very good documentation. So let's grab those measures. We'll take the prior day count and put it in our pivot table. So now you can see the prior day count corresponds to, well, it matches the prior day count of decedent. So you can see as we look at this list for 11/24/2008, prior day count in fact matches 11/23, and so on and so forth. So prior day count is working. Now let's look at the measure change since prior day is what we'll name this measure. And we're taking the count of decedent divided by prior day count. And the count of decedent is relative to the pivot table that it's in. So you can see that we'll just be dividing, as you can see here, for November 23rd, we divide 570 by 634, and you get 0.899. And here, you can see that I could just type in a formula, 593 divided by 570, and we will get, in fact, 1.04351. So now what we want to do is we want to get the last non-blank count of decedent. So from our entire data set, get the last non-blank count of decedent. So get that date, and then we want to subtract 10 days from that. Now, notice that we are calculating this against all of the rows in the fact decedent table. And you can see those functions at play in this measure. So this will give us the last non-blank decedent and then 10 days back. And this will be a building block for us for another measure. And so here is our measure defined. And you can see that the all DAX function against the table fact decedent. And here's msdn.com. You can just search on DAX SQL 2012 all. But you can see here, it operates on all of the rows in the table, ignoring any filters that have been applied. And now we can go to our spreadsheet, the pivot table that we're building out, just to see the way these various measures are evaluated. We're only going to use a few of them when we finally build out our ICD critical trend dashboard. So last non-blink decedent is December 29, 2008. I showed that earlier, and that in fact is the last date of the data set. And you can see that here. So throughout the entire data set, we are reflecting December 29, 2008. Last date is operating, in our case, its last date is simply operating off the current row. So that's just simply a function for our purposes returning the current row date. And we're going to use that with a little conditional statement that I'll show you momentarily. So you can see that last date for that particular row in fact matches the current date of that particular row. And this is just so that the DAX function evaluates properly. And so now what we will do is, in fact, look at the last, we showed the last non-blank decedent. Now is when we will take that last non-blank decedent, which was December 29, 2008, and we will subtract 10 days from it. This uses the all function. So when we drop in the last non-blank 10 days back, I think you probably know what date will appear. It will be December 29 minus 10 days. And again, we're going to bring this all together once I show you these functions all evaluated. So there you go. We have the last non-blank decedent, 12/29. We have that next to the last date, which is just the current date of the row, and then 10 days back. And we have all the building blocks. Now is the measure that we will actually use in our column filters within Excel, and I'll show that in a minute. So is the date 10 days back less than the last the current date? So when we go to our pivot table in the spreadsheet, the last date is the date of that current row, and we're asking is the December 19th, 2008, is that less than or equal to the current row date? And if the answer is true, then we will return a 1. Otherwise, we'll return a 0. Let's take a look. So we grab that measure, and they got a bunch of zeros. And as we scroll, and you can clearly see the condition holds that would be 0. Because 12/19 is not less than or equal to 11/6/2008. It's greater than all of these dates. But when we get to December 19th, sure enough, it's equal to December 19th. 12/19 is equal to that current row's date, December 19th. So we get a 1. And we get a 1 all the way up to 10 days forward. So you can see we've now selected the last 10 days from the most current non-blank decedent. So we now have our building blocks for the ICD critical trend dashboard. We have our count of decedent, we have the change since prior day, and we have the Boolean 1 to represent the last 10 days. And we can use these now in our pivot table. So we're just going to restructure the pivot table now. We went count of decedent preceding the change since prior day. And this is how we would achieve the filtering. I'm going to actually now put the date text aligned in the column labels. And we use column filtering, and we actually will look at that function that looks for the Boolean equals to 1, the last 10 days less than or equal to the last non-blank. And now we only have 10 days represented in our columns. And we can just do some Excel column selection to shrink these columns down to something a little more reasonable, something that's more readable. So let's do that. Now keep in mind, these are counts for all decedents for those respective days. And we'll do some column header alignment as well. Let's make these columns vertically aligned. Buy us a little real estate, makes it a little more easier to read. So we don't want all of the counts for every day. We'd like those broken out by ICD. So we're going to drop the ICD into the row label. So let's do that. Now we have the last 10 days for all of the ICDs recorded for those last 10 days. And that's not exactly what we want, because recall, we just want the top 10. So now let's do a little, let's turn off the auto fit so we don't have to keep resizing the columns. Now we're going to use some row filters, and we'll use something called a value filter. And we go to top 10. You can certainly change this, but we'll leave it at the default. But we're going to use the change since prior day for our top 10. There we go. We have the top 10 change since prior day. So now all we need to do is make this look nice, color banding and data bars, and we're done. And in our next session, we'll look at how we can post this to SharePoint and make it more of a SharePoint dashboard, as well as I'll show you some of the PowerPivot gallery functionality. Go ahead and add the California county so we can get a little drill down. And this is essentially the way we would build out the color banding. Just select the columns. And here's the end product. So thank you, and we'll see you at the next session.